Should we be building farms or forests in cities? In quite a few episodes, I've made the case for having a lot more greenery in the city, but I've been thinking a lot about which one to prioritize because of an unguarded comment that I made to a big fan of the show, Indy from Indiana. You see, Indy had sent me these images of a vertical forest, that is a forested skyscraper in Milan, as well as a forest city being built in China, and wanted to know if I'd done any episodes on them. Well, it turned out I hadn't, though I hope to someday. But just off the cuff, while I was glad to see more greenery in the city, my initial reaction was to prioritize food, an opinion that I later revised, as you'll see. Because whether it's urban food gardens, or forests, or wetlands, or other constructed wildlife habitats, cities need a lot more of both. So in today's episode, I'll make the case for each, and then show how each improves the other and makes city life overall much better. Welcome to Edenicity, best practices for sustainably abundant cities. Let's start with food. Why should we grow food in cities? The bottom line is it's much better for us and much better for the world if we grow food close to where we live. And this has been clear for a really long time. Even back in the days of ancient Rome, when people lived on their family estates, they actually improved the soil by gardening in layers. But as their agriculture evolved into plantation agriculture that was much larger scale and worked by overseers and slaves for absentee landlords, the soils lost 90% of their fertility. Today, with mechanized agriculture, we are even more detached from the landscapes that feed us, and now have a system where, at best, most of the food we eat comes from agriculture where the farmer tries very hard to make sure that there is only one living species between earth and sky. If you look at this picture, you'll see that there's stands of trees in the background, and in those stands of trees there are no doubt ground covers, shrubs, vines, many species of animals, fungi, protists, bacteria, and so forth. It's a very much richer system, and if you weigh all of that biomass, there's far more living biomass per square meter in that stand of trees than in the field in the foreground. And this is how, by occupying half the world, we've managed to kill half the living biomass. Now, cities occupy 3% of the land, and by growing food in cities where we live, using layered techniques that provide multiple yields, we can unburden the larger spaces so that Earth can come back to life. And just to be clear, this is a gradual process. Most of us don't know much about how to grow food in a layered, efficient way, and it will take some time to come up to speed with those skills. So it's not like we need to shut everything down and start over. It's just we need to get moving on some new approaches before we wipe out too much more of the world. Now, growing food in cities also provides health benefits in that food that's harvested much closer to where you live can be much fresher and is much easier to inspect for quality and handling. Food that's grown in the landscape where you live also is much less prone to unjust labor practices for the simple fact that whatever happens is visible to the consumer, unlike the situation for nearly all the food that most of us consume today. Now, I know this sounds fairly theoretical, but as you'll see later in the episode, there are cities today where they're moving rapidly toward the realization of just this concept. Okay, those are the reasons why we should grow food in cities. It's better for us. It's much, much better for the planet. We need to do more and more of it as quickly as we can. Why should we have forest cities? And of course, that's just a shorthand for wetlands, grasslands, and restoring wild habitat. For people, the benefits are very clear. We get much cleaner air and water through the filtering effect of leaves and root systems. The groundwater is recharged, so we have much more water available to us. Trees have numerous mechanisms to moderate the climate, through shade, through evapotranspiration, through direct storage of water in their trunks and root systems, and the ability of those systems to assist in holding water in soils long enough to percolate into the groundwater. And as Jonathan Rose points out in The Well-Tempered City, one tree can provide the cooling effect of 10 air conditioners. The list goes on. Restored wild habitat can manage pests through balanced ecosystems. This is how, according to a Purdue extension study, ponds can reduce mosquito populations by 90% when properly stocked with fish and amphibians. And of course, having all this greenery and much more bearable temperatures does a lot for our mental health. There's actually studies documented here again that looked at streets with lots of trees and streets with few trees and found that there was a correlation between the tree-lined streets and less use of antidepressants. So restoring wild habitats close to where we live is really good for us in multiple ways. But it's also good for the planet because forest cities reconnect habitats that were previously interrupted by highways and other construction. For cities near waterways, which is pretty much most cities in the world, restoring wetlands is absolutely vital. According to the Water Stories YouTube channel, worldwide we have drained 87% of wetlands, which has not only dried out the planet, but also interfered with migrations and cloud formation on the coasts, the filtering of wastes, the nutrient balance and transfer into inland waterways. Wetlands are the most productive environments on the planet for building high-quality soils. And all three environments, the wetlands, grasslands, and forests, are great at rehydrating landscapes, sequestering carbon, and directly moderating climate through the water cycle. So forest cities are great for people and the planet. Does that mean we should prioritize them above food cities? Well, the second law of Edenic design states that design resolves false dichotomies. The choice between planting food and wild habitat is a dichotomy, and like other dichotomies, such as freedom versus security, it proves to be false when we have good design. So let's take a look at how food systems and natural habitats help each other in the city. Okay, in this diagram, hardware is in gray, food is in yellow, wild habitat in green, and the resources or services that they produce are in blue. So in a good Edenicity design, we start with relatively high-density housing. This would be apartments, preferably 2- or 3-story walk-ups over commercial spaces of one sort or another for maximum walkability. And with apartment buildings, it's relatively efficient to have a flat rooftop, which is a natural location for gardens. These, of course, can provide food and compost, which can go back to gardens. Apartments also have facades, which can be used for many living things, including wildflowers, which in turn can support pollinators that provide services to gardens and to other things in this diagram as well. Apartments make it very easy to put in public transit, and public transit, as we've seen in many other videos, is much safer and much healthier for us than automotive transit. We're talking factors of tens to several hundred. Public transit is also about 10 times more affordable than automotive transit, but in terms of landscape design, its main advantage is it uses way less space than roads and parking, something like 10 to 30 times less space. And again, as we've seen elsewhere, cars use up anywhere from 50 to up to 80% of the space in cities when you include green strips and setbacks, such as front lawns that keep us safe from the dangerous traffic. So by building car-free, we literally make space for orchards, farms, forest parks, and restored creek beds, which in turn help to recharge groundwater, which benefits all of the agricultural systems and buffers floods and droughts in the city and helps to prevent fires. And of course, as you can imagine, there are far more design elements and connections possible in any given landscape than what I've shown here. Okay, let's get into a few of the practicalities of bringing these ideas into real landscape. And let's start by looking at what happens when design fails. If you've ever seen any bird spikes on a property, that's a clear sign that the architect was not thinking of the more than human world when they designed the structure. Many other species also use the spaces that we live in, and we can either work with them or against them. And when it's against them, it's often kind of a losing battle. It inconveniences us, it inconveniences them, and it often doesn't even work at all. And if you've ever seen a fancy museum with bird spikes everywhere, you know it absolutely ruins the look. Because it's so expensive to put anything in a building, we need to be very careful what we put where when we're building farm or forest landscapes. Construction costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 per square meter, or anywhere from $300 to $500 per square foot. And of course, there's always maintenance to be considered as well. Rooftops are natural places for greenhouses and pergolas, of course, as well as row crops and low shrubs, but probably not trees in most cases, especially when you're retrofitting an older property that may not have been built to take a lot of weight on the roof. The facades of buildings are natural places for vines, flowers, and nesting sites. And on the ground floor for espalier plantings of fruit and nut trees, as you can see in the inset. This is where you basically wire the branches of a tree to a wall as it grows. And some espaliers can not only be aesthetically pleasing, but also enjoy some cold weather protection, which can be very beneficial for fruit trees. But facades are terrible places for crops that need to be harvested frequently, as well as for much heavier trees when you're looking at the higher floors, because again, the maintenance gets to be cumbersome. It takes people rappelling down the sides of the buildings. And that's exactly what the maintenance regime is in the vertical forest in Milan. The thing that I think should be really clear from this is that the facade of the building can provide so much more growing area than is even available at ground level. So it's possible to increase the biomass where we live to much more than was there originally. Here's a lovely view looking down into the courtyard from higher in the building, and a view from one of the apartments. It does take very careful planning and very careful design and construction to pull something like this off. And the maintenance is not trivial. But it's a nice place to live, isn't it? Now, the cost of developing landscapes is much lower in terms of direct construction costs, so pretty much anything goes there. But in a city, the opportunity cost of putting anything in at the ground level can be very high indeed. Think of all those inhabited stories that could be built above any given parcel of land. In my view, balancing these priorities in such a way that we have a great environment to live in that nourishes people and the planet and provides a lot of great places to live and work and play is the province of good planning. And there's no shortage of really good planning among the cities of the world. In Singapore, for example, they have a 30 by 30 initiative to go from growing 10% of their food locally in, I think it was 2020, to 30% of it locally by 2030. That's a really substantial increase, as well as the LUSH policy. This is landscaping for urban spaces and high rises. Now, I have to admit, I get a little lost in the acronyms, but here's what it looks like on the ground. This is the Kompang Admiralty in Singapore. And as you can see, there's multiple layers of gardens in this recreation and health center. The objective is to use the facades and the roof lines to make it possible to have more living biomass and more biodiversity than was there prior to construction. Similarly, the Park Royal Collection in Pickering, also in Singapore, is a hotel where they've used multiple sky decks to have twice as much biomass and substantially more biodiversity than was present prior to construction. And as a permaculturist, I'm glad to see that they have layered living environments here, where you have ground covers, shrubs, and overstory trees. This is how you do that. Now, as I was putting this together, my mom sent me a link to some restoration of beaver habitat in Britain, and in London in particular. And as they found in the city, the beavers are really good at building dams that help to deal with stormwater, that help to mitigate storms and filter the water, and just provide all of the physical environments that other species, such as the water vole, would need to make a return to the area. Now, I don't have any particular footage, but Detroit had 1,200 community gardens as of 2012, a number which I'm sure has gotten bigger. And the cities of New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Copenhagen manage stormwater through green roofs, rain gardens, and wildlife refuges, which have provided a lot of physical resilience to a more extreme climate, and save them about 86% compared to the cost of building mechanical systems to provide the same services. As it stands today, hundreds of cities are not only on the job, but sharing their results with one another. This started some time back with a focused meeting on cities and biodiversity in 2007 in Curitiba, Brazil, where 34 cities signed a declaration that they were committing to urban ecology and wildlife conservation to make their cities more livable. By the 2010 follow-up meeting in Nagoya, Japan, there were 240 cities on the list. And this is remarkable because many of these cities are facing regional and national governments that are actively hostile to climate mitigation, or indeed any efforts to restore and improve natural environments. I'm really excited about this because cities are a natural laboratory, neither too big nor too small, to understand change at scale. In a city, you can bring a great deal of specialization to bear on a problem, and come up with very creative solutions, as I will detail in future episodes. And unlike rural environments where I've worked, in a city you're swimming in data, and it's much easier to share the data and compare your results with those of other cities. And you also have the human resources at hand to change and adapt that much faster. As a trained wildlife habitat steward, permaculturist, and former market gardener, I can't wait to bring these stories to you. So if you see a white subscribe button below this video, be sure to tap that so you don't miss out. Okay, you can check out this video to learn more about Edenicity, or download a copy of the reference design to see how all the pieces might fit together conceptually. And no, it doesn't all have to be rectangular like this, it's just much easier to draw. I hope to do an update sometime this summer. And thanks so much to the patrons for supporting this channel. It really means a lot to me. Take care, stay green, see you next time.